Welcome! This is the Boox fall preview and other predictions. I'm pretty excited about this one. This is where I'm going to kind of look at the tea leaves and see what we can expect to be released by Boox and its competitors over the next few months. So I think this will be an interesting video, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are and if you have a different take than what I have. So this should be fun. So I'm looking forward to your comments on that. So the basic premise here is that for the last few years, it's been tradition for Boox to release a new slate of devices in the months between September and November. And that varies from year to year, but usually in that 3-month period, there's a pretty big announcement during that time. So I'm going to look at historical patterns to identify what's reasonable to expect in its various product classes. And then I'm going to give a kind of a quasi hot take, I suppose, about what a potential surprise device might be this fall. And then we'll look and see what competitors might do as well in relationship to Boox. The focus on Boox is because they're really the more interesting company in terms of product releases. So Boox releases products at a rate way higher than any of the competitors. You can take that as a positive and as a negative, but for the purpose of this video, that's why our focus is there. So without any further ado, let's start getting into it. And before I start looking at some specific product classes, I want to make some broad statements about what I think we can expect this fall. And I want to start off with what I think will be probably the big overarching announcement by Boox, and that will be the introduction of Android 12. For those that don't know, all Boox devices currently released run on Android 11, and the latest version of Android in the market today is Android 13. So they're a couple of versions behind. When the first Boox device came out with Android 11, it was roughly a year from when Android 11 first appeared. So there was a bit, Android 11 is released, a year goes by, Boox is starting to release devices with that operating system. That gap is now 3 years. So it seems to me almost certain. In fact, a lot of people thought that last year was going to be the announcement for Android 12. Didn't come to pass. Feels like this is definitely the one. So I think across all their products, they'll start announcing Android 12, which will be introduced first, obviously, with their new releases, and then they'll go back to some of their devices and upgrade those accordingly. So that's the big first major announcement, which kind of is an overarching announcement that I think will happen. I think the other thing that will happen is that Boox has this rich history of pretty awful cases for its devices, from awful to serviceable. The case for the Ultra Mini C was actually quite good. I have great things to say about it, and I think that's going to portend to future cases that Boox will release. So I think we'll start to see that be a feature going forward as well. I don't think every device is going to have a fantastic case, but I think we're going to see a few more cases be released with some of the new products that Boox will announce, and it's going to thankfully move in that direction of a higher quality, more premium, and durable case. So I think those between Android 12 and between those cases, those are things that are going to kind of happen across the board. So having talked about that in the big picture, let's start to hone down into the different product classes based on screen size and look to see what's the most likely announcements that will take place in the fall from Boox. And we'll start with a 6-inch class. Now the 6-inch class, as well as the 7-inch class, which we're about to get to, is purely an e-reader class. It's not a note taker. It doesn't have the ability to use a stylus to take notes. So these are basically just e-readers. And we can actually look at the history. So in the 6-inch space, it's been the Poke device. That's their Boox's 6-inch e-reader. And going back, at least looking at the last 5 years, going back to 2020, we had the release of the Poke 2. We saw a color version of that, and then they've gone up to the Poke 5, which was released just this past May. I don't anticipate a color version of this device, mainly because my understanding is Kaleido 3 comes in three sizes, which is 13 inch, 10.3, and 8 or 7.8 inch. So I don't think it's going to come to this class. And given they just released a black and white device, I don't actually anticipate any announcements in the 6-inch space by Boox. So that's my first prediction. There will be no additional devices in this product class, at least this fall. So that's it for the 6-inch space. If we focus on the 7-inch space, so this is historically, at least the last few years, has been occupied by the Leaf. Most recently, it got supplanted by the Page, which was released just this past June, so just a couple months back. Again, I don't anticipate any type of color version of this, so I'm going to stick to the same prediction I had in the 6-inch space and say that there isn't going to be anything here that's going to be released. So I think it's going to be very quiet on the pure e-reader front for Boox in the last half of the year, because they've announced new products in the first half of the year, and I don't see color being a factor in either product class. So so far I'm predicting nothing. So that takes us to the more exciting product classes, starting with the 7.8 inch class. So sales numbers are hard to come by. The industry is very opaque, and particularly companies like Boox, which is, I believe, a private company, and so they're not releasing financial statements. And even if they did, it would probably be consolidated statements where it wouldn't have much detail. So it's hard to tell what sells more than others, although there are hints at that. And one hint is the number of devices that's released for a particular product class. And so in the 7.8, or we'll call it the 8-inch space, if you can see on the table, in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of devices released. First starting with kind of the Nova series, that evolved into the Nova Air series, and then most recently the Tab Mini C. So since the Tab Mini C was just released back in June and is a very hot device, it seems really unlikely to me, obviously, that there'll be an update there. But the Nova Air series, I think, is ripe for another iteration. And there's two possibilities here. So you could have a Nova Air 3, so just kind of the next iteration of what we've seen before, or we could have a Nova Air C 2. I don't think we're going to see a Nova Air C2, because I think the Tab Mini C has really kind of carved out that space. The Nova Air C is still out there and is doing well. So I think you will see, this is my first prediction in terms of devices, a Nova Air 3 in the 8-inch space. I think that's the most likely thing that we'll hear about. It's a strong seller. It's hard to imagine Boox not releasing a device in that class, given how popular this particular screen size is. So that is my first prediction there. I'm going to skip over a class because I think the 10-inch class is the most interesting of them, and I'm going to leave that for last. So we're now going to jump into the 13-inch class. And this is the class that's basically been designated, at least over the last few years, with the Max Lumi series, and that just gave way this past January to the Tab X. So the Tab series, just for those that don't know, is the e-ink screens that have graphic processors. So they're a little more of a premium product line. And the Tab series is supposed to be moving more toward a productivity device like a laptop computer than a normal e-ink device that focuses on e-reading and e-note taking. So that's kind of the basic idea of those devices. So there was a Tab X released in January of this year. The 13.3-inch space is a niche space amongst a niche product class. And it's mainly because they're so expensive. I mean, these devices, are $700 or more, approaching $1,000 when you're, including cases and that sort of thing. So they don't sell in large quantities, and there's massive trade-offs when you move from a 10-inch device to a 13-inch device. Now, what's nice about a 13-inch device is it's the size of a piece of paper. So it sounds great, and it's fantastic for PDF viewing and note-taking because you can see the entire PDF as it was meant to be viewed onto one page or one screen, if it were, as it were. So that's the huge advantage of that. But you can actually simulate that on a 10-inch screen by cutting the page in half, essentially, and looking at the top half and then going to the bottom. So, you have some compromises going from the 13-inch to the 10-inch as it relates to PDF viewing. And there's a lot of things you lose going from 10-inch to 13-inch. You lose portability, you add weight, it's a little bit of a bulkier device, and it's a lot more expensive. So the only point of all this is a product class that I think is not nearly as popular as the 10 and 8-inch spaces. And so as a result of that, I don't anticipate a lot of products being announced in this category. So I don't think there's going to be, for example, another Max Lumi. I think that product line is probably done, and it'll be permanently supplanted by the Tab X series. But I do predict that there'll be a Tab XC, so a Kaleido 3 version of the Tab X. Just a side note editorial, my personal experience, and it's been limited, I owned the Max Lumi 2 for a brief period of time. I was really disappointed in it. I really felt like Boox took a 10-inch screen and stretched it out to a 13-inch screen. It's clear that Boox puts its thought and its design in the 10-inch space. And then 13-inch is let's just make it a bigger screen and call it a day. So I'll give you one, example of that. So, if you have a template on the 10-inch, which is, say, 32 lines, just a lined piece of paper, instead of having that template in, the 13-inch, but with more lines, it's just the exact same template with more space between the lines. I mean, to me, that's the type of simple design choices which show how little investment they put into the 13-inch space. Again, if you're into PDF viewing, then I totally understand why a 13-inch device is exciting, and a color one would definitely be exciting. But I just hope that in addition to releasing a Tab XC, that we see a little more thought, that they treat that as its own device and give it its own special attention, as opposed to just a 10-inch on a bigger screen, both in terms of the hardware design and also in the software design as well. So that's just, pardon my quick editorial, but I think there's a lot of room in that space to put a little more thought in there. I just don't think they will, because I think that just adding color to the Tab X is probably good enough for them in this space, and so that's my prediction. So there you go. All right, so that takes us to the largest product class, which is the 10-inch class. So again, it's really hard to tell because of that lack of clarity around sales and what have you, but I'm pretty sure the 10-inch space is probably the most popular space for books. It certainly gets the most press. I could make arguments that it's probably the best screen size, balancing reading and note-taking while maintaining portability. And I think that's probably encapsulated mostly by the Note Air series. So in this space, over the last 5 years, there was the original Note series that evolved into the Note Air series, and then within just almost a year now, the introduction of 2 devices in the Tab series. And we talked about the role of the Tab series just a few moments ago. So this is prime real estate. Now, having said that, the Tab Ultra C was just released recently, so I certainly don't expect an update there, but I expect a lot of activity in this space, and I think there's going to be 2 releases of note. So the first is going to be just a second version of the Tab Ultra, the black and white version. I think they'll release an iteration of that. It'll be a year, coming in October. And hopefully, and I think there's a good chance, they're going to get rid of that camera bump, among other kind of iterative changes to that device. So I think that's one major announcement that Boox will have. But I think the biggest announcement of all the products we've talked about, the headliner, if you will, is going to be the Note Air C. So a Kaleido 3 version of the Note Air. I think that's going to be their big seller this fall. It's not quite as premium as the Tab series, but as a result of that, it's a lot less expensive, at least a couple $100. And it's going to have color, and it's just still a fantastic device. That is, the Note Air series are fantastic devices. So that would continue through the Note Air C. So I think that is the marquee release that's going to take place for Boox this fall. So let's kind of review that in total. So I actually think that there's going to be 4 products announced, in addition to the announcements around Android 12, and then some of these products will have better covers. I wouldn't know which ones. Probably the Tab series, but it's possible that the Note Air series, the Note Air C, will have a better cover as well. We'll just have to see. But in order of importance in terms of the marketplace, I think there'll be a Nova Air 3, a black and white model. I think there'll be a Tab Ultra 2, Tab X Color or Tab XC, and then a Note Air C will be the predominant release this fall. So that's my prediction. Now, I think that the process that I used to get to this point is pretty reasonable. I mean, we just looked at historical patterns, and we looked at where it would seem to be obvious that there would be future iterations based on those patterns. So in a lot of ways, there's no hot take here, right? This is all kind of obvious. It's not that profound when you have the context of history involved. And I think, I believe that is probably these 4 devices, or at least 3 of these 4 devices, are, highly likely to be what's announced this fall. I don't anticipate a huge announcement, because the 2 biggest announcements that Boox has made, first off, introducing the Tab series, hasn't even been a year yet since they did that. Again, adding graphical processors to their devices. But also, just a couple months ago, there was the announcement of the Boox Palma, which was a limited edition device, at least at this time, which is kind of like basically an iPod with an e-ink screen. So that, because there's a lot of innovation from Boox recently, I think playing it safe and kind of following the historical pattern makes a lot of sense, at least for this fall. But if I had to have a hot take, and it wouldn't be any fun unless I did, right? So even though I don't believe that what I'm about to say is going to happen, but then again, I wouldn't have predicted the Tab series either. So you have to think of it from that perspective. If I had to have a hot take, I would say that the next step in the evolution that Boox is taking would be to release an actual e-ink laptop computer. It makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, they started with e-readers, they moved into note taking, and then with the Tab series, started to move away from the e-tablet into more of the productivity device, particularly with the Tab Ultra that comes with that, where you can buy an additional keyboard cover. Doesn't come with it. So that evolution seems clear, and why that evolution is happening is clear too. So what Boox is doing is they're really trying to open up the marketplace for their devices. And e-readers has been a dying category for a long time, and it's a highly competitive category as well, and obviously one dominated by Kindles and Kobos, and we'll get to that. So their main niche right now is in note-taking, but that space alone is fairly limited too, and that's why I think they've been moving into this Tab series, moving more into the productivity sphere, and so a laptop would be a natural extension of that. So if I were to predict something that isn't just the trends moving forward, that would be my hot take, that there's going to be an e-ink laptop, maybe something akin to a Chromebook. I would imagine they'll stick to Android and just focus on the form factor of a laptop as opposed to moving to Windows or Chrome OS or what have you. So I think they still hold on to their past and hold on to their current product lines, but they move even further into the computer space. That's my hot take, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm just putting that in my hip pocket just in the off chance that it does. So those are my predictions for Boox. But what about what the other competitors are doing? Well, let's take a quick look at that. So, to kind of look at the competitors, let's first figure out who they are, and then we'll dive into the more significant ones. And I'm going to have an interesting way to do that. So, as I mentioned, sales are very difficult to come by. So you kind of have to find other ways to kind of understand what an impact a company may have in this space. And I'm going to use subreddit membership on Reddit as that proxy. And so if you look at this table, you can see what I think are the big five in the e-ink space. That's Amazon's Kindle, the Remarkable, Kobo, Boox, as we've been talking about, and the Supernote. These five companies by far have the largest subreddit members, and it's not even close. You can see poor Nook is this significant drop below, and then you've got companies like Mobiscribe and BigMe and Re-Inkstone, which are just blips on the market. Now, that doesn't mean they're not releasing good products, by the way. My only point here is that they're very small relative to the big five players that I've identified. And then there are other players out there in the market that have just no presence at all. Bookin, MeBook, Topjoy. Those might be big in other areas. They might be big, for example, in China. I have no visibility into the Chinese market. But at least in the Western market, in the United States in particular, they're just not players. Now, there are two companies that I've noted there below, Lenovo and Huawei, that have major Reddit pages that also release e-ink devices. But let's be honest, if you think Lenovo, you don't think of an e-ink device. In fact, most of the chatter on their subreddit page was around laptop computers. In a similar fashion, Huawei is really more about, they're not exclusively, but they're more about cell phones and those types of electronics. So I clearly identify five companies at the top, particularly for the e-reader and e-note-taking space, and those are those top five. So we've talked about books. Let's talk a little bit about Kindle and Kobo. Both Kindle and Kobo have e-note-taking devices, but obviously most of what they're talking about in the subreddits are e-reading, right? And I would still argue that products like the Scribe or the Ellipse are really still fundamentally about buying books. Kobo and Kindle are still using their device as predominantly vehicles for people to buy books. And I don't think that their note-taking devices actually deviate from that. Might they deviate and start shifting more into productivity and work applications? They might. The hardware is there. All they need to do is evolve their software more, and then they can start to actually be more of a factor in that space as well. The question really is, do they want to? And so far the answer to that is no. But nevertheless, if we just look at their e-writing devices to get a sense of whether they'll have any updates this fall, we'll start with the Kindle. And essentially, the Scribe was released not quite a year ago. It was in November of last year, 2022. Do I think they're going to release a Scribe 2? The hardware on that device is really good. They've been doing software updates to improve it. I think that's what we're going to see from Kindle and Amazon going forward. I don't necessarily see an updated device. I just think it's too soon for them. So I don't anticipate them releasing anything this fall. In addition to that, Kobo actually released an update to their Ellipse. Came out first back in June of 2021, and they released their subsequent Ellipse 2 just a few months ago. So I don't see anything new coming from them in the next few months either. And again, I also predict that those two companies are going to stick to their lane. So I don't see a lot of competition really from Boox's perspective from those two companies. So that's my take on them. So that leaves two major players that do compete directly with Boox, and that is the Supernote and Remarkable. Now, Supernote is actually, they're very transparent about their release schedule, and they're basically in the process now of actually phasing out their A6X. That's their smaller, I think roughly 8-inch device. that is going to, you can't even buy that currently unless it's in kind of an open box situation. So they're phasing out that inventory, and they're going to be replacing it with the A6 X2. Unlike Boox devices, which kind of go with new features, new hardware features, etc., the A6 X2 is going to be different than what came before, but not in a huge manner. It can, in this case, run on either Android or Linux. That's one of the major functions, and also has a replaceable battery. So it's really, they're really not putting it out there as a device that they expect people who own A6s to necessarily switch up to. They're just kind of evolving their product lines over time. So I do expect that device to come out before the end of the year. They're also going to eventually phase out their A5X, again, for an A5X2 with the exact same feature set that I just discussed. I don't think that's going to happen this year. So we are going to see a new release from Supernote, but it's not going to be anything dramatically different than what they've done in the past. They're just kind of tweaking their current product line. Supernote's focus is much more on the software and development side of the house, and that looks to continue. Remarkable is a little more interesting, though, and there are no announcements currently from Remarkable, but it certainly feels like they might be releasing a new product soon. The Remarkable One first started taking pre-orders around 2017, and then the Remarkable 2 was released around 2020. So we've got a device that's 3 years old. And so there was a lot of thought that last year they were going to release the Remarkable 3, but instead they released the keyboard attachment to that device, and that was their big announcement. So are we going to see a Remarkable 3? I don't know. My thoughts on that is that, I have a video on the Remarkable, and I talk about how it's a device that I really like, but I don't use. And you can take a look at that and understand that better. But basically, the crux of my argument is that the hardware is amazing. It's a timeless hardware. It still remains, to my knowledge, the thinnest tablet out there. It's really neat to hold on to it. It's got a really nice look. It's not dated at all. There's nothing about that device from a hardware perspective where, I as a consumer go, okay, what's next? It's the software where the opportunity is. So, and as many people know, Remarkable is trying to focus on moving away from hardware sales, which, are obviously dwindling as they're saturating the market, to more of a subscription-based product. And they announced that, I can't remember if it was 2 years ago, this idea of a subscription. But I think that's where they really want to focus. I don't think they need to focus on the hardware. Now, would it hurt to have some updated internals into the Remarkable 3 that can tie into some of the enhancements they want to do from a software perspective? Well, possibly. So it's not impossible to think that there'll be a new hardware from Remarkable. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on that. I'm 50-50, I guess, ultimately. 50% saying no new hardware release, but a potential major announcement around the software side of the equation. And 50% a hardware and software announcement from Remarkable. So I think among the major players, Boox is going to have for sure the bigger announcements because they always do. But I think Remarkable is that next company to take a look at and see what they do. Now, of course, a lot of the small players, like a Big Me comes to mind, might have some significant announcements of their own, and they need to. They need to do that in order to break through and to compete. So I would say my predictions are the devices I've talked about with Boox, a major announcement from Remarkable, and then pretty quiet from the other major competitors. And then we might see something from the next class down of someone trying to use that as a window of releasing a new device to try to get some market saturation. But I have no predictions as to what that might be. One obvious possibility would be Gallery 3, which is a relatively new technology. It was announced last year, simultaneous roughly to Kaleido 3. And there's one device that I'm aware of that has Gallery 3, which is the Big Me Galley, and it's just doesn't seem ready for prime time, in my opinion, and I think a lot of vendors feel the same way. And so we thought there were going to be a lot of devices out with Gallery 3, and we haven't seen them. So my gut tells me we're not going to see those this fall, and we're going to wait for the next iteration of Gallery, or maybe even the next iteration of Kaleido, and there are no announcements on that front at this time. It took a year from the time that Kaleido 3 was announced when the first product started to arrive, and that was just a few months ago. So I think we're going to have Kaleido 3 as our premier color technology for a while now, at least for the next year, and maybe even the next 2 years. So I just don't see a lot of development in color in the short term. And so I'm not sure what other competitors can release, frankly, that's going to challenge, the big five. Anyway, that's my take on what Boox is going to release and what the big competitors are going to release for this fall. As I mentioned, I would love to hear your comments. One of these devices I'm hoping to purchase and review, so be sure to subscribe. If they come out with the Note Air C, that's probably going to be the one, unless they do something that I'm not predicting and release that Tab XC with notable improvements and attentions to detail, then maybe that's the product I'll review. We'll see. But anyway, those are my predictions. Please tell me yours. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.